This is Philosophy 2 at Las Positas College. I'm going to review assignment 6.2 a little bit here. The assignment is somewhat complex, but I think with some explanation and a few heads-up warnings here, you can all do well on this assignment. So this assignment has essentially 3 parts. Part 1 is an example that supports the utilitarian against the Kantian view. Part 2 is one that supports the Kantian view against the utilitarian, and then your perspective is at the end. So it's important to point out that part 1 and part 2, there are 2 things that you have to accomplish here. So the first thing is that you have to give an example that supports, in this case, the utilitarian view over the Kantian view. So your example is given, but then you have to be very explicit about why this example supports the utilitarian view over and against the Kantian view. So that means that for part 1, I'm going to be giving one of these 2 types of examples. Let's say we choose scenario type 1, some action that is morally good. So it's one where we are inclined to say, what this person did was a morally good thing. It's good because of the consequences, and it's something where we are inclined to say it's good, even though the motivation itself was bad. So that means that by the time you get to here, explaining why your example supports the utilitarian view, you have to explicitly show that we have a tendency to say, for this kind of example, that this action was good because the consequences were good, even though, in this case, the motivation was bad. And a lot of students will do this, but I found a lot of students start to leave that second part out. So just remember, start with the example, make sure the example is clear, and then go on to explicitly say, the reason this example makes us want to side with the utilitarian is if instead you chose this kind of scenario, then you would say the reason why we want to say that this example is an example of someone acting morally bad, even though their motivation was good, is ... Then it will be similar considerations for part 2. Here you want your example to support the Kantian view against the consequentialist view, which means that in this case you'll be generating one of these 2 types of scenarios. And then you're going to want to make sure after you give the example, you actually do explain to us why in this example the action seems like it's morally good because it was done with the right motivation, even though the consequences were bad. In other words, even though the utilitarian would consider the action to be morally bad. Or the reverse scenario, actions where we tend to think, that was a bad action. Why? Because it was done for the wrong reason, that is, with the wrong motivation, even though the consequences were good. And so that corresponds with the 2 parts. First, your example, and then explicitly saying why your example is an example of scenario 3 or 4, and why it inclines us to support a Kantian evaluation more than a utilitarian, that is, a consequentialist one. The last section is actually pretty straightforward, and most students do well with this because it's just giving your own point of view on the 2 theories as you've already thought about them. You also want to remember that this assignment is about evaluating the utilitarian and the Kantian just on that aspect of their theories that deals with, is it the motivation or the result that makes an action good? There are other differences between a Kantian and a utilitarian view, but those aren't what you're considering right now. So make sure that your entire assignment centers around this question of the conflict of evaluating actions as moral or immoral based on the consequences if I'm a utilitarian, or based on the motivation if I'm a Kantian. Alright, I hope this helps to set you up for the assignment. I look forward to reading your essays and hearing your thoughts as well.